Do you guys remember the scene in The Princess Bride when Wesley is in the pit of despair and Count Rugen is testing the torture machine on him for the first time? Yes. Great. We're going to do well today. Afterwards, as Wesley is whimpering, the Count opens his notebook and asks, "How did that feel? And remember, this is for posterity." All right. So that's how I felt, and all I could think about as my body was heaving over a toilet in an emergency room cubicle at Emory University Hospital in 2001. The ER doctor, who actually asked, "How are you feeling right now?" as this was happening, was a real deadpan kind of guy. When I asked if the collapsed lung I was experiencing could be fatal, he declared, "Oh, you'd be dead by now." Now, normally when I tell the story of the lung collapse, I start with the fact that my back kind of hurt that morning, and I go on to talk about picking up some friends at the airport, and then visiting the pandas at the zoo, and ending up on the Emory campus. I didn't know it, but throughout the day, oxygen was literally leaking through my lungs and filling the spaces between my organs. And by the time we got to early evening, I was feeling more and more like I was underwater every time I spoke. And usually as I'm telling this, I get some good laughs, as I did just now. Because usually I tell the story as a comedy. To me, what's the point of trying to bring everyone down over something silly that happened to me 15 years ago? I use the pandas to their full entertainment potential. And I mention how my doctor suggested that instead of giving up marijuana altogether, I should just switch to brownies. Now, I might make light of it now, but I promise at the time I was actually quite terrified. So maybe it's not so silly. But a couple other things about me. I can bend the veins under my skin. When I sleep on something patterned, my face is imprinted with that pattern for hours. My tongue looks like the Grand Canyon. If you smack the back of my leg with a wiffle ball bat, as my friends did senior year of college, my calves were turned into a dragon fruit. And my intestines are a whole other type of delicate. Here's something that doesn't feel as silly. In 2013, in the midst of a complete breakdown, I nearly burned down my house. But let me back up a bit. The lung collapse was in 2001, which is the same year I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. Then there's 2006, when I was driving from Boston to Albany with my older sister. She told me that they had discovered something interesting about our 17-year-old cousin who was in the hospital dying of cancer at the time. It's called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and she made sure to mention how hard it was to Google because of its weird spelling. Apparently, this Ehlers-Danlos thing is a chronic collagen deficiency, and it runs rampant throughout my mother's side of our Eastern European Jewish family. Immediately, I remembered a girl nibbling on my earlobes when I was 16 and how my ears turned completely black and blue for days. I thought about what my dentist called a fissured tongue, about the wobbly knees and stretchy skin I had been using as party tricks for years. Come see me later, I'll show you. So what is EDS exactly? Well, it's a collection of heritable connective tissue disorders. For me, it means that the problem is not the stretch or the earlobe nibble or the wiffle ball bat smack, as it were. It's the recovery. A backache on Thursday is probably due to sitting with my legs crossed on Monday. I get pins and needles in my arms for hours after being stuck in traffic. My collagen breaks down, and everyone's does, but unlike most people, mine just doesn't rebuild itself properly. When I kneel down, standing up leaves me quite lightheaded. This is something we in the EDS community call brain fog, and it's caused by the way our blood does or does not flow properly. When we're not dizzy from standing up, we're left absent-minded from something as innocuous as walking a few blocks. Our bodies are literally starving our brains of blood, and our brains respond accordingly. In 2009, my wife and I were planning our wedding, and I was starting a new job, two pretty low-stress situations. And I decided it would also be a good time to train for a half marathon. What's the problem with that? I had very little interest in letting my Ehlers-Danlos affect my life. I saw that my sister, 12 years my elder, was having some issues with it. She's a writer and had difficulty typing for long periods of time. Her celiac was acting up more than usual, but like I said, she's 12 years older than I am, and I was 26, and who wants to worry that kind of shit when they're 26? Mm-hmm. Then one day I was running on the treadmill and lost vision on my left side. So I went to a cardiologist and a neurologist and also a geneticist who specializes in EDS. And the geneticist poked, literally, and prodded, not quite literally. She asked me questions about my sex life, my skin, my parents, my tongue. She wrote up a very long report all about me and my striking striae distensae over the thoracic lumbar region of my back, or as we might call them, stretch marks. Then she ordered that cardiological test and the neurological test, and when everything came back fine, she said she'd see me 2 years later and that, oh yes, I had EDS. What comes next in a situation like this? Someone tells you something you already know but have been avoiding. They tell you that your body is not what you thought it was. It's sick, but not in a way that you can cure. It won't necessarily kill you, at least not anytime in the immediate future. Admitting weaknesses is something I find extremely difficult to do, and this isn't really about being macho. It's about admitting that the vision you have for yourself is not going to play out. I think this probably happens to everyone as they grow up, but this is more nuanced and life-altering than realizing you'll never be an astronaut. The first thing I did was go home and tell my fiancée. She asked how I felt about it, and I shrugged and said, nothing has really changed. Reflecting on that moment 7 years later, it occurs to me that maybe that wasn't the most natural of responses. I don't think I was scared necessarily. It helped that as a white upper-middle-class male without much previous trauma, I had little reason to deem this new official label as anything but a simple hurdle to get over and leave behind. I was determined, subconsciously or otherwise, to not let this diagnosis mean much of anything. 4 years later, I got really sick from some bad turkey. I contracted an awful stomach bug called Campylobacter. I lost 30 pounds and completely threw off my GI system. By this point, I was 30. I was finishing up my MFA thesis, starting a business with some friends, and even thinking about applying to PhD programs. I probably should have taken some time to recover, but I didn't. Blame my hubris, my upbringing in a family of achievers, my education in competitive private school. Instead of slowing down, I pushed harder and tried to get all of the things. The degree, the business, the PhD acceptance letter. Now, of course, I knew I had to put some of that weight back on. I was busy, though, and I believed in the irrefutable nature of numbers. So my solution was to start tracking my calories. I hit my calorie goals, but to be honest, if I got to 9 p.m. and I was still short, the solution was to pack on those last few hundred calories, was to chug a couple beers. And I wasn't really helping myself during the day either. While I was tracking my calories, I was also tracking my miles. I had given up on the half marathon idea long before, but I still considered myself a runner and hoped to stay that way. It was just 5Ks, 10Ks, 5-milers, relatively small stuff. A healthy body is a running one. Fitbit, after all, says we need 10,000 steps a day. Now, according to the website I was using, I needed 2,700 calories a day. That was to reach my goal of 150 pounds, which I hadn't been since the freshman year of college. The routine was to down a few beers at night, get up in the morning, pretty much lose all of the previous day's calories in the bathroom. I'd then stretch, go for a run, come home, stretch again, then get to writing. Throughout the day, I'd eat very little because I felt so awful. I'd maybe force some dinner into myself, get those beers again, and repeat. What's weird is that it was never a doctor who told me I was sick. Sure, they said, you have colitis, or a collapsed lung, or weakening bones, or delicate skin. They'd give me a prescription for a bone density scan and tell me I could have a handicap placard if I wanted one, which of course I didn't. But they never said, you're going to kill yourself if you do not slow the fuck down. That was my sister. She was the one person who said, I know what this is, I know what it's doing, I see it, I feel it, I recognize it, and you have to acknowledge that it is real. I know it was hard for her to say that to me, but when she did, that was the moment that this all became like a thing for me, a real thing about me and the way that I am and the consequences of that. I was always someone willing to discuss my abnormalities, though, of course, never as weaknesses. It's a defense mechanism, a way to sort of claim the oddities for myself before you could pounce on them and exploit them as weaknesses. It's like making a big deal about being awful at basketball before a pickup game, and then when you seriously suck, your detractors are almost impotent. Sharing this story is part of a process, one where I'm learning how to say out loud, I have a disability and I need help. When you look at me, you probably don't notice it, but it's there. And for right now, for me at least, the emotional risk of telling you about it outweighs the physical risk any accommodations might prevent. So I'd rather not say anything than have to ask for a more comfortable chair to sit in. So when am I sick? Am I sick when the DNA evidence or blood test says so? Am I sick when a doctor or a book says I am? Once I'm recognized as sick, who gets to take control of me? Who will try to use my pain to objectify me? What systems am I buying into in the name of health or prevention that are really eating away at a condition or identity that I should instead be embracing? Now, I hope you can tell that by now I've recovered from that rough time. It took Lexapro, 3 shrinks, no more running, physical therapy, and a consistent high-calorie, low-fiber diet. But I put on 40 pounds, got into grad school, and gave up on trying to run a business with my friends. When I was going... Thank you. I needed a sip of water, so that was great. Thank you. When I was going through the worst of this breakdown, one of my therapists told me to start eating oatmeal with poached eggs, olive oil, and brown sugar. I know, it sounds super weird, but I promise it's actually delicious, and I ate it for breakfast for 3 years straight. And one evening I came home. It was in the winter months. I got home at a reasonable enough hour that I got there before my wife, but it was still dark already. And I walked into our apartment in Boston without turning the lights on. I was tired and just wasn't in the mood for lights much around that time. I put my backpack down, I took off my jacket, I left both on the couch, I walked into the kitchen for a snack or probably a beer. When I got in there, the first thing I noticed was that one of the gas burners on our stove was on. The flame was low, the lowest setting possible, but it was bright blue and immediately discernible in the dark. In retrospect, I had been propping a sick body up with a starved mind and an unhealthy and unfair insistence that it would all be fine. But I could no longer ignore it. As soon as I saw that flame, I began to sob. I knew that I had left it on that morning after poaching my eggs in simmering water. An errant spark or a breeze could have burned down all 7 units in that building and maybe the places next door. But this wasn't just about the flame. More certain than the possibility of burning down the house was the fact that my body was deteriorating. And nothing in that moment felt very silly. Thank you.